The morning rush at Daybreak Cafe hit like clockwork at 7:30. Richard Grant's hands moved with military precision, efficiently crafting lattes and clearing dishes with the same focus he once applied to aircraft systems. 6 years removed from the Air Force, his life had become a carefully orchestrated routine. Wake at 5 a.m., prepare Sophie's lunch drop, her at Mrs. Wilson's before his shift, then transform into the quiet, reliable barista who kept the caffeine flowing for Boston's working class. Steam hissed from the espresso machine as Richard wiped condensation from his brow. The cafe's polished floors reflected morning light that streamed through large windows, illuminating the crowd of impatient customers. He had just finished crafting a perfect rosetta on a flat white when the bell above the door chimed, announcing yet another patron. The cafe fell silent as Alexandra Holt strode in her designer heels, clicking authoritatively against the tile floor. Even those unfamiliar with her face recognized power when they saw it. Her tailored charcoal suit probably cost more than what Richard earned in 3 months. Without hesitation, she bypassed the line and approached the counter, removing her sunglasses to reveal steely gray eyes that expected immediate service. Richard didn't look up, immediately focused on handing change to an elderly regular. Only after completing the transaction did he finally acknowledge the woman who stood impatiently tapping manicured nails against the marble countertop. "I'm sorry, you'll need to wait in line." Richard's voice remained calm and steady, his tone polite but firm. The morning chatter abruptly ceased as customers turned to witness the unexpected confrontation. Alexandra's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched in disbelief. "Do you know who I am? A customer?" Richard's gaze met hers directly, unintimidated. And every customer gets their turn. Something flickered across Alexandra's face. Surprise, perhaps respect, quickly masked by irritation. She glanced at his name tag, then back at his face with newfound intensity. The line behind her shifted uncomfortably, witnessing what they assumed would be the swift termination of the barista who dared defy Alexandra Holt, CEO of Horizon Properties, whose company logo adorned half the city's construction sites. Instead of creating a scene, Alexandra stepped back, joining the queue with a tight smile. When she finally reached the counter again, Richard took her order with the same efficiency he showed every customer. As he handed her the cup, she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. "We need to talk privately. It's about Sarah Parker." The name hit Richard like a physical blow. His fingers went slack, the ceramic cup slipping from his grasp and shattering against the floor in an explosion of porcelain and hot liquid. The sound punctuated the sudden vacuum of his thoughts. Memories he'd carefully packed away, bursting forth like water through a broken dam. Sarah. Dark curls and laughing eyes. Midnight conversations about dreams and futures. The promise to return once his training was complete. The letter that came instead, ending everything without explanation. "Richard." The manager's concerned voice barely registered. "You okay?" "I have a daughter." The words escaped as a hoarse whisper meant only for himself, but loud enough for Alexandra to hear. His world tilted on its axis, the familiar cafe suddenly foreign territory. Alexandra placed a business card on the counter, her expression unreadable. "My office, tomorrow at 10. It's time you knew the truth." Richard stared at the elegant script. Alexandra Holt, CEO, Horizon Properties. As she walked away, leaving him frozen in place amidst the broken ceramic and spilled coffee that suddenly seemed like perfect metaphors for his carefully constructed life. The apartment in East Boston wasn't much, a small 2-bedroom with peeling paint and temperamental plumbing, but Richard had transformed it into a home. Sophie's crayon drawings covered the refrigerator, bright splashes of color against the otherwise utilitarian kitchen. Second-hand furniture filled the living room, worn but clean, arranged to maximize the limited space. A plastic dinosaur peeked out from beneath the couch, evidence of Sophie's latest obsession. Richard moved through the evening routine mechanically, his mind elsewhere, as he prepared Sophie's favorite dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets. The 3-year-old chatted animatedly from her booster seat, blissfully unaware of her father's distraction. "And then Emily said her daddy's a doctor, but I told her my daddy fixes airplanes and makes coffee," Sophie declared, dunking a pterodactyl nugget into ketchup with surgical precision. Richard forced a smile, mentally returning to the present. "I don't fix airplanes anymore, Soph. Just coffee now." But you know how right her wide blue eyes, the same shade as his own, looked up with complete trust. "I do know how." Later, after tucking Sophie in with 3 bedtime stories instead of the usual 2, Richard sat at the kitchen table with a beer he didn't really want, turning Alexandra Holt's business card over in his fingers. He'd known this day might come, had both dreaded and hoped for it in equal measure. The possibility had lived in the back of his mind for 6 years, ever since learning of Sarah's death through a mutual friend's brief, devastatingly casual Facebook post. Sarah Parker had died, and apparently she'd left something behind, someone he knew nothing about. Richard's gaze drifted to the small box on the top shelf hidden behind cereal boxes where Sophie couldn't reach. It contained the remnants of his relationship with Sarah, movie ticket stubs, a dried flower from their first date, and letters exchanged during his initial training. He hadn't looked at them in years, hadn't allowed himself to. His hands shook slightly as he reached for the box, disturbing a fine layer of dust. Inside, beneath the memorabilia, lay the last photograph they'd taken together. Sarah smiling broadly, arms wrapped around his waist, her head tilted back to look up at him. They'd been young, barely into their 20s, full of plans for a future that would never materialize. Richard's mind traveled back 6 years to their final conversation before his deployment. Sarah had been uncharacteristically quiet, picking at her food in the restaurant where they'd had their first date. "Is something wrong?" Richard had asked, reaching for her hand across the table. Sarah's eyes had met his, conflicted and searching. "What would you say if I told you I wanted to start a family?" The question had caught him off guard. "Right now, not this second, but soon, before your deployment ends." Richard remembered the weight of uncertainty that had settled in his chest. "That's a big step, Sarah. I'm not sure I'm ready to be a father. Not when I don't even know where the Air Force might send me next." Sarah's face had fallen momentarily before she'd composed herself, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're right, it's too soon. Let's revisit after your deployment." They'd parted at the airport with promises to write to video call when possible to plan their future once he returned. Richard had boarded his flight, believing they had all the time in the world to figure things out. 3 weeks later, her letter arrived, ending their relationship with painful brevity and little explanation. Now, 6 years later, Alexandra Holt's 5 words echoed in his mind. "It's time you knew the truth." Sleep proved elusive that night, his thoughts idling between memories of Sarah and speculations about Alexandra Holt's revelation. By morning, Richard had rehearsed a dozen versions of the conversation, they might have none of which prepared him for what actually awaited. The Horizon Properties building dominated the downtown skyline, its glass exterior reflecting clouds and blue sky, intimidating in its sleek modernity. Richard stood outside for several minutes, Sophie's small hand clasped tightly in his. He'd tried arranging childcare, but Mrs. Wilson had an appointment, and he couldn't afford a last-minute sitter. Some instinct told him this meeting would change their lives forever, and he couldn't leave Sophie behind for that. "Daddy, is this where the princess lives?" Sophie's eyes widened as she took in the towering structure. "Not a princess, sweetie. Just someone I need to talk to." The lobby security guard eyed Richard's worn jeans and simple jacket, skeptically, clearly about to block their entry, until Alexandra herself appeared at the elevator bank, waving them through with a curt nod to security. "It's okay. They're expected." The elevator ride stretched in uncomfortable silence, Sophie happily pressing her nose to the glass wall as they ascended 30 floors in seconds. Richard studied Alexandra covertly, noting the perfectly tailored suit, the expertly applied makeup that emphasized her sharp cheekbones, the cool composure that revealed nothing of her thoughts. If Sarah had been sunlight, Alexandra was polished marble, beautiful but unyielding. Alexandra's office occupied the building's northeast corner, offering panoramic views of Boston Harbor. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the space in natural light, highlighting modern furnishings in shades of gray and blue. Richard's attention, however, immediately fixed on the photograph prominently displayed on her desk, Sarah smiling radiantly while holding a newborn with a wisp of dark hair. "That's Grace." Alexandra's voice softened as she followed his gaze. "She's 6 now." Richard's legs suddenly felt unsteady. He sank into the chair opposite Alexandra's desk, unable to tear his eyes from the photograph. He had a daughter, a 6-year-old daughter he'd never met, never known existed. The reality of it crashed over him in waves, each one threatening to pull him under. Sophie, oblivious to the adult's tension, had discovered a small collection of toys in the corner, clearly kept for visiting children, and busied herself building a tower with colorful blocks. "Is Sarah really gone?" The question escaped Richard's lips before he could consider its implications. Part of him still hoped for some elaborate misunderstanding that Sarah might walk through the door and explain everything herself. Alexandra's expression softened fractionally. Yes, I was with her at the hospital. She asked me to take care of Grace to raise her to keep her safe. Richard's throat constricted. When 6 years ago, she was on her way to the airport. She was coming to see you to tell you about the baby in person. She wanted to surprise you. Alexandra paused, gathering strength before continuing. A drunk driver ran a red light. The impact was catastrophic. Emergency services did everything possible, but her injuries were too severe. They managed to deliver Grace through emergency C-section. Sarah held her for exactly 3 minutes before. Richard covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Sophie, sensing her father's distress, abandoned her blocks and climbed into his lap, wrapping small arms around his neck. The innocent gesture only intensified his grief. This child comforting him, while another child, his flesh and blood, had grown up without him. "Why didn't you tell me?" Richard finally asked, his voice raw. 6 years, and you never thought I deserved to know. Alexandra's professional veneer cracked slightly. I tried. For the first year, I hired investigators, but you'd been deployed to classified locations. Your base wouldn't forward messages without proper clearance. By the time you completed your service, you'd moved multiple times, changed phone numbers. Sarah's parents refused to help. They never approved of your relationship and wanted nothing to do with Grace. Richard's mind whirled with implications. Sarah must have discovered her pregnancy shortly after their last conversation, after he had expressed reluctance about starting a family. The timing aligned perfectly, explaining her sudden withdrawal. She had been protecting him, or perhaps herself, from his potential rejection. Why now? What changed? Richard asked, struggling to process the tidal wave of revelations. Alexandra turned her computer monitor toward him, revealing a child's drawing in bright crayons. Grace had depicted 3 figures, a woman labeled Mommy, a little girl labeled Me, and a soldier in uniform labeled Daddy. She started asking questions I can't answer anymore. Alexandra's voice had lost its professional edge, revealing genuine emotion for the first time. Questions about where she came from, why she doesn't have a father. I've tried explaining, but she's smart. She knows something doesn't add up. Alexandra pulled another drawing from her desk drawer, this one showing a soldier holding hands with a woman and a little girl. At the top, Grace had written in careful letters, "My family dream." She drew this entirely from imagination, Alexandra explained. But look at the details, the way she drew the soldier's stance, the shape of his face. Somehow she knows you, Richard. Maybe Sarah described you to her during the pregnancy. Maybe it's something deeper. I don't have those answers. Richard traced the drawing with one finger, tears falling onto the paper. Can I meet her? That's why I found you. But this is complicated. She thinks I'm her mother. She calls me Mommy. I can't just bring you in and destroy her entire world without preparation. I understand. I'll wait. Do whatever's best for her. Richard's gaze returned to Sophie, who had wandered back to the blocks, blissfully unaware that her entire world was shifting. Would the girls get along? Would they recognize each other as sisters despite their different mothers? The questions multiplied faster than he could process them. Alexandra stood and walked to her window, looking out over the city. I need you to understand something. I love Grace with everything I am. I've raised her, nursed her through illnesses, celebrated every milestone. I'm not just her guardian, I'm her mother. I would never try to take her from you, Richard said firmly. You saved her. You gave her a life Sarah and I couldn't give her. I'm grateful beyond words. Alexandra turned back, unshed tears glistening in her eyes. Sarah made me promise something else. If the time comes when he can know when it's safe, tell him the truth. Let him be part of her life. I think that time has come. Before Richard left, Alexandra gave him a recent photograph of Grace. In it, the girl was laughing at a park, her dark curls weaved around her face, joy radiating from every pixel. She looks exactly like Sarah. Richard's voice broke as he studied his daughter's features. She has your stubbornness, Alexandra replied with a watery smile, and your sense of justice. Last week, she organized all the kids in her class to share lunch with a new student who didn't have money for cafeteria food. Richard clutched the photo like a lifeline. When can I see her? I need to prepare her first. Tell her the truth gradually. Give her time to process. Is 2 weeks enough for you to prepare? We could start with a casual meeting, perhaps at the park where she likes to play. I've been waiting 6 years without knowing. 2 more weeks seems like nothing. Richard tucked the photo carefully into his wallet next to the one of Sophie. Thank you for finding me, for keeping your promise to Sarah. As Richard and Sophie left, Alexandra stood at her window watching them walk down the street. Richard bent down, lifting Sophie onto his shoulders, her delighted laughter floating up even through the sealed glass. He was a good father, that much was obvious. Sarah had chosen well. Now Alexandra just had to figure out how to tell a 6-year-old that the family she'd been dreaming of had been real and all along, just scattered across the city, waiting to find each other. Alexandra's path to becoming CEO of Horizon Properties hadn't been straightforward. The daughter of a prominent Boston family, she'd rejected her parents' plans for law school, instead pursuing urban development with a focus on sustainable housing. When her father suffered a stroke 5 years ago, she'd stepped in temporarily to lead the company, proving herself so capable that the board eventually removed interim from her title. Under her leadership, when Horizon had expanded beyond luxury developments to include affordable housing initiatives, earning both praise from community advocates and resistance from the traditional board members who prioritize profit margins. The current battle centered on the East Harbor project. Board members pushed for luxury condominiums, while Alexandra fought for mixed-income housing that would revitalize the neighborhood without displacing current residents. These professional challenges seemed trivial now compared to the personal dilemma she faced. Alexandra returned to her desk after Richard's departure, opening her laptop to the calendar reminder for tomorrow's board meeting. The East Harbor presentation demanded her full attention, but her thoughts remained fixed on Grace and the inevitable complications ahead. A knock at her door interrupted her reverie. Alexandra looked up to find her assistant Michael holding a stack of reports. The quarterly projections you requested. Also, Mr. Chen called again about tomorrow's presentation. He's concerned about the financial models for the affordable housing component. Thank you, Michael. Tell Richard I'll call him back this afternoon. Alexandra paused, realizing she'd used the wrong name. I mean Robert. Tell Robert I'll call him back. Michael nodded, seemingly not noticing the slip. Also, your mother called. Twice. Something about the charity gala next month. Alexandra suppressed a sigh. Tell her I'll review the guest list this weekend. After Michael departed, Alexandra opened her desk drawer, extracting a small leather journal. Sarah's journal, recovered from her personal effects after the accident. Alexandra had read it countless times over the years, searching for guidance in raising Grace, as Sarah would have wanted. Now she flipped to the final entries written during the pregnancy Sarah had kept secret from everyone except her closest friend. I know I should tell him, Sarah had written 3 weeks before the accident. He deserves to know he's going to be a father. But what if he rejects us? What if he feels trapped? I can't bear to see disappointment in his eyes when I tell him. Maybe after basic training, when he's settled into his assignment. Maybe then. The final entry, dated just days before the crash, revealed Sarah's change of heart. I'm flying to see Richard tomorrow. No more secrets, no more fear. He deserves to know about our baby, deserves the chance to choose us. Whatever happens, at least I'll know I gave our child the opportunity to know her father. Alexandra closed the journal, emotion tightening her throat. She'd honored Sarah's wishes as best she could, raising Grace with stories of her birth mother's kindness, her creativity, her laughter. But she'd never mentioned Richard, never known how to explain his absence without revealing Sarah's decision to keep the pregnancy secret. Now that carefully constructed narrative would need revision. Grace would learn not only that Alexandra wasn't her biological mother, something the child already understood in age-appropriate terms, but that her father had been alive and unknowing all these years. How would a 6-year-old process such complex adult decisions? Alexandra's gaze fell on the framed photograph of herself and Grace at last year's company picnic, both wearing matching baseball caps and exaggerated grins. The bond between them transcended biology. They were family in every way that mattered. Would Richard's presence strengthen or threaten that connection? Alexandra couldn't predict the outcome, could only move forward with careful planning and hope for the best. She reached for her phone, scrolling to Dr. Matthews' contact information. The child psychologist had guided them through conversations about Sarah's death and adoption. She would know how to approach this new chapter. Tomorrow's board meeting would proceed as scheduled, but tonight Alexandra needed expertise beyond business strategy. Richard returned to work the following day, his mind a battlefield of competing emotions as he mechanically crafted drinks and cleared tables. Anger at losing 6 years with a daughter he never knew existed. Grief for Sarah reopened and raw. Gratitude toward Alexandra for raising Grace. Anxiety about how to integrate this new reality with his life as Sophie's father. The morning rush kept him too busy for extended reflection, but during the mid-morning lull, his thoughts returned to the practical implications. His small apartment barely accommodated him and Sophie. Adding regular visits with Grace would stretch his limited resources further. His schedule at daybreak offered little flexibility for childcare if Grace started spending nights with them. And what would he tell Sophie at 3? Her understanding of family relationships remained simplistic. "Hey, you okay, Mike?" The cafe manager appeared beside him, concern evident. "You've been cleaning that same spot for 5 minutes." Richard blinked, realizing he had been mindlessly wiping an already spotless counter. "Just tired. Sophie had nightmares last night." The lie came easily, though Richard immediately felt guilty. Mike had been a godsend after Richard's brief marriage imploded, offering flexible hours when babysitters fell through and occasionally watching Sophie himself during emergencies. He deserved honesty, but Richard wasn't ready to share the complexity of his situation, not when he barely understood it himself. The cafe door chimed as a customer entered. A sharply dressed man Richard vaguely recognized as a regular who usually ordered black coffee and tipped generously. Today, however, the man approached with purpose rather than heading to the counter. "Richard Grant," the man extended a business card. "Robert Chin, Chief Financial Officer at Horizon Properties." Richard tensed, accepting the card automatically. "Is everything okay with Ms. Holt?" "She's fine." Chen glanced around the half-empty cafe before continuing in a lowered voice. "I'd like to discuss a private matter. Perhaps we could speak somewhere more appropriate," Mike interjected before Richard could respond. "Take 15, Rich. You can use the back office." The cramped office barely contained a desk and 2 chairs amid boxes of supplies. Chen remained standing, examining the space with poorly concealed disdain. "I'll be direct, Mr. Grant. I understand Ms. Holt shared some sensitive information with you yesterday." Richard crossed his arms. "That's between Ms. Holt and me." Chen's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Horizon Properties is currently negotiating several major development contracts. Our reputation is paramount. Any complications could jeopardize deals worth millions." "What exactly are you implying?" Chen removed an envelope from his jacket, placing it on the desk between them. "Inside is a non-disclosure agreement and a check for $50,000. Sign the NDA, cash the check, and continue your life as before. No media interviews, no custody claims, no contact with Ms. Holt or the child." Richard stared at the envelope, momentary temptation flickering through his mind. $50,000 would transform his and Sophie's lives. A better apartment, a college fund, maybe even vocational training to escape the service industry. For a split second, he imagined the possibilities. Then Sophie's face flashed in his mind, followed by the drawing Grace had created of her imaginary family. Both children deserved better than a father who could be bought. Richard pushed the envelope back across the desk. "I'm not interested. 100,000 then." Chen's voice hardened. "But that's my final offer. Consider carefully before refusing. Not everyone gets a 6-figure opportunity for simply walking away. I already lost 6 years with my daughter. I won't lose another day for any amount." Richard opened the office door. "Please leave before I have you escorted out." Chen's expression darkened as he retrieved the envelope. "Ms. Holt is making a terrible mistake bringing you into her life. The board won't stand for it. Neither will our shareholders when they learn she's been raising an employee's illegitimate child." That employee was the woman she considered a sister, Richard countered, anger rising. "And there was nothing illegitimate about Sarah or our daughter." After Chen departed, Richard leaned against the wall, processing the encounter. The CFO's visit confirmed what he'd already suspected. Alexandra's decision to contact him carried professional risks. The company's leadership clearly viewed him as a threat rather than Grace's rightful father. What other obstacles would emerge as they moved forward? And how would they affect Grace, caught in the middle of adult complications she couldn't possibly understand? Richard completed his shift, mechanically grateful when Mike didn't question his subdued mood. He picked up Sophie from Mrs. Wilson's apartment, listening to her chatter about dinosaur documentaries while mentally rehearsing what he'd tell Alexandra about Chen's visit. The CFO's intimidation tactics suggested internal opposition beyond what Alexandra had acknowledged. She needed to know exactly what they were facing together. That evening, after tucking Sophie into bed, Richard called the number Alexandra had provided for emergencies. She answered on the third ring, her voice shifting from professional to concerned when she recognized his number. Did something happen? Richard briefly recounted Chen's visit and offer. I thought you should know what your colleagues are doing behind your back. Silence stretched across the connection before Alexandra responded, her voice tight with controlled anger. I'm sorry, Richard. Robert overstepped badly. This won't happen again. He mentioned board members and shareholders. Are you sure you want to proceed with this if it risks your position? My position isn't more important than Grace's right to know her father. Alexandra's resolution carried clearly through the phone. Don't worry about Robert or the board. I've been handling corporate politics since before most of them joined the company. The confidence in her voice reassured Richard somewhat, though concerns lingered. His limited understanding of corporate dynamics came primarily from movies and television, but even he recognized the potential career implications for Alexandra. Her willingness to risk professional standing for Grace's benefit elevated his respect for her commitment to his daughter. I appreciate that. I don't want to make things harder for either of you. Richard, listen to me. Alexandra's tone softened slightly. Sarah was the sister I never had. When she died, I promised to protect Grace with everything I have. That includes protecting her right to know where she comes from. The company will adjust, or I'll find another path. Either way, Grace comes first. Her certainty calmed Richard's immediate concerns, though practical questions remained. How are you planning to introduce me to her? I've been consulting with Grace's psychologist. We're going to start this weekend with stories about Sarah's friends, including you. Next week, I'll show her some photographs of you and Sarah together. Then if she seems receptive, we'll arrange that park meeting we discussed. Richard absorbed the methodical approach, recognizing the care Alexandra was taking to protect Grace's emotional well-being. The gradual introduction made sense, though it required patience he wasn't sure he possessed. Having discovered Grace's existence every day without meeting her felt like another loss. There's something else you should know. Alexandra hesitated briefly. Grace has been asking more specific questions lately about her father. Last week she asked if he was a soldier. I didn't confirm or deny, just asked why she thought that. She said she remembered him wearing a uniform in her dreams. Richard's breath caught. Children often had intuitive connections that defied logical explanation. Had some part of Grace somehow recognized his military background without ever seeing him, or had Sarah shared details during her pregnancy that somehow imprinted on their daughter's subconscious? What did you tell her? That dreams sometimes show us what we wish for, and sometimes show us memories we didn't know we had. I've been careful not to lie directly, Richard. I didn't want to build a foundation she'd later have to unlearn. The consideration in Alexandra's approach impressed Richard. She could have easily fabricated a convenient story about Grace's father being deceased or unknown, simplifying her own role as sole parent. Instead, she'd navigated the complex territory with integrity, preserving the possibility of future relationship despite the complications it created for her own bond with Grace. Thank you for that. I know none of this has been easy for you. After ending the call, Richard retrieved the photograph of Grace from his wallet, studying his daughter's features with new awareness. The shape of her eyes mirrored his own, though her smile was purely Sarah's. 6 years of milestones missed. First words, first steps, first day of school. Moments that could never be recaptured, existing now only in Alexandra's memories and perhaps photographs he hadn't yet seen. Richard's gaze shifted to Sophie's bedroom door, slightly ajar, to allow the hallway nightlight to reach her bed. How would his younger daughter react to discovering she had an older sister? Sophie had occasionally mentioned wanting a sibling, but the abstract desire differed significantly from the reality of sharing her father's attention. The complexity of balancing relationships with both daughters while respecting Alexandra's maternal role with Grace seemed overwhelming when considered in totality. Yet beneath the anxiety and uncertainty, a thread of purpose had returned to Richard's life. Something beyond the daily routine of work and childcare that had defined his existence since leaving the military. His daughter needed him. Not in the ways he might have imagined had he known of her existence from birth, but in ways that only he could fulfill as her biological father. That knowledge anchored him against the turbulence of emotions threatening to overwhelm his carefully structured life. Alexandra had carefully planned the weekend's approach to introducing Richard's existence into Grace's awareness. Saturday morning breakfast would include casual stories about Sarah's friends, including Richard. Sunday afternoon art time would incorporate photographs of Sarah's past, subtly including images with Richard. The child psychologist had recommended this gradual normalization before direct revelation, creating space for Grace to process information incrementally. Those carefully constructed plans collapsed Friday afternoon when Alexandra's assistant rushed into her office during a conference call, expression alarmed. "Ms. Holt, you need to see this immediately." Alexandra excused herself from the call, accepting the tablet Michael thrust toward her. The screen displayed a tabloid website with a glaring headline, "Billionaire CEO's Secret Scandal Mystery Man Claims Paternity of Adopted Daughter." Below the sensationalist text appeared a photograph taken at the charity gala Alexandra had hosted the previous weekend. Richard had been there as a server hired by the catering company. The image captured him bent down speaking to Grace, who had approached asking for a cookie. Their profiles appeared side by side, the resemblance unmistakable to anyone looking for it. Someone had been looking for it. Alexandra's phone exploded with notifications. Board members, investors, journalists, all demanding explanations. The company's stock ticker in the corner of her computer screen flashed red, indicating a sharp decline as speculation fueled market anxiety. An emergency board meeting notification appeared in her calendar, automatically scheduled for 4 p.m. "Call Richard, tell him what's happening." Alexandra handed the tablet back to Michael, her mind already cataloging necessary responses. "Then get me Grace's school on the line. I need to pick her up before reporters start showing up there." Within an hour, the carefully constructed narrative had shattered beyond repair. Alexandra collected Grace early from school, citing a family emergency that wasn't entirely untrue. Richard requested emergency leave from work, arranging for Sophie to stay with Mrs. Wilson overnight. The adults convened in Alexandra's penthouse while Grace played in her bedroom, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around her young life. Richard paced the living room, expression alternating between shock and anger. How did they get that photograph? Who would do this? Alexandra stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching evening lights illuminate the city below. "I have suspicions. The timing is too convenient, coming right after Robert's failed attempt to buy you off." "You think your own CFO leaked this?" Richard halted mid-stride, incredulous. "Robert has been positioning himself for the CEO role since before my father's stroke." Alexandra's voice remained calm despite the chaos surrounding them. "He's also heavily invested in the East Harbor luxury development I've been blocking. If I'm discredited, the board will likely approve his vision for the project." Richard absorbed this information, struggling to connect corporate machinations to the personal bombshell affecting their children. "So this isn't even about Grace or me. We're just collateral damage in some boardroom power play. Welcome to corporate politics." Alexandra's smile held no humor. "The question now is how we respond. The board meeting starts in 30 minutes. I need to decide what I'm telling them." Richard sank onto the sofa, overwhelmed by the escalating situation. "What are our options?" Alexandra joined him, maintaining professional composure despite her internal turmoil. "I could deny everything, claim the photograph shows nothing significant, and continue with our original plan to introduce you gradually. That approach protects the company's stock price, but makes us look guilty when the truth eventually emerges. Alternatively, I acknowledge you as Grace's biological father, explaining Sarah's relationship with both of us. That transparency might mitigate long-term damage, but creates immediate corporate fallout and forces us to accelerate Grace's introduction to you." Neither option addressed the fundamental problem. Grace remained unaware of Richard's significance in her life. The manufactured scandal would force revelations before either adult felt prepared, potentially traumatizing the child caught in the center of adult conflicts. Alexandra leaned forward, lowering her voice, though Grace remained safely in her bedroom. "We need to tell her tonight before she hears something from classmates or sees a news alert. She's too smart not to connect the pieces if given partial information." The prospect terrified Richard, who had imagined a gradual, carefully managed introduction rather than crisis-driven revelation. How do we even start that conversation? Together, Alexandra's certainty provided some comfort. "I'll initiate the discussion about Sarah, then introduce you properly as her father. We emphasize that you didn't know about her until recently, that no one was abandoning her. We focus on how much everyone loves her, how this gives her more family, rather than changing her existing relationships. The approach made logical sense despite its emotional complexity. Richard nodded slowly, steeling himself for the most important conversation of his life, one that would forever alter his relationship with a daughter he hadn't yet properly met. Alexandra stood straightening her suit jacket in an unconscious gesture of preparation. I need to handle the board first. Can you stay here with Grace? Just continue as her mommy's friend until I return. We'll talk to her together tonight. Richard agreed, though anxiety knotted his stomach at the prospect of spending time alone with Grace without context or preparation. What if she asked questions he couldn't answer? What if she somehow intuited their connection? Before Alexandra returned to manage the conversation, Grace emerged from her bedroom as Alexandra prepared to leave, confused by the unusual schedule disruption. Why did I come home early? Is something wrong? Alexandra knelt to Grace's level, maintaining calm for her daughter's benefit. Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. Mommy has an important meeting, so my friend Richard is going to stay with you for a little while. Remember Richard from the charity party? He helped serve the cookies you liked. Grace studied Richard with Sarah's thoughtful expression, head tilted slightly, as she assessed this unexpected development. She nodded slowly, accepting Alexandra's explanation with the resilience characteristic of children accustomed to secure attachment. Can we make cookies while you're gone? Alexandra smiled genuinely for the first time that day, briefly cupping Grace's cheek. That sounds perfect. I'll be back before bedtime, and we'll have a special family talk then. As Alexandra departed for the board meeting, Richard found himself alone with his daughter for the first time in her 6 years of life. The magnitude of the moment nearly overwhelmed him. This small person with Sarah's curls in his eyes, unaware that her entire world would shift before she slept tonight. Grace regarded him without her earlier hesitation, apparently having decided he passed inspection. Do you know how to make chocolate chip cookies? Richard nodded, grateful for the concrete activity to focus their interaction. I do. My other daughter Sophie and I make them sometimes. You have a daughter. Grace's interest visibly peaked. How old is she? 3. Richard moved toward the kitchen, hoping familiar activities would ease their interaction. She loves dinosaurs and anything purple. I liked dinosaurs when I was little too. Grace followed, climbing onto a stool at the kitchen island with practiced ease. Now I like space and drawing. Does Sophie like drawing? The innocent question provided natural segue into conversation as they gathered baking ingredients. Richard carefully measured flour while Grace counted chocolate chips, their interaction gradually relaxing into comfortable rhythm. He marveled at her articulation, her confidence, the thoughtful questions that revealed intelligence beyond her years. Alexandra and Sarah's influence showed in Grace's mannerisms, the way she carefully wiped spilled flour, her methodical organization of ingredients. As the cookies baked, filling the apartment with comforting aroma, Grace retrieved her sketchbook to show Richard her recent drawings. Each page revealed insight into her perceptions, detailed renderings of Alexandra's office, imaginative space scenes, and portraits of people in her life. Richard paused at a drawing labeled My Family Dreams, the soldier figure standing beside a woman and child exactly as Alexandra had described. Who's this? Richard asked, carefully indicating the uniformed figure. Grace's expression grew serious, her voice dropping to near whisper. That's my real dad. I dream about him sometimes. Mommy says he couldn't be with us, but I think he would have loved me if he knew me. The simple statement pierced Richard's heart with unexpected force. I'm sure he would have Grace. Very, very much. Meanwhile, Alexandra faced the assembled board members, their expressions ranging from concern to poorly concealed satisfaction at her predicament. Robert Chen sat at the far end, his practiced, sympathetic expression belied by triumph in his eyes. The CEO's chair at the head of the table felt particularly isolated today, as Alexandra prepared to defend not just her professional decisions, but her personal ones as well. You need to deny this immediately, Richard Chen began without preamble. Issue a statement that these claims are baseless, that you will not tolerate slander against your family. Our legal team has prepared a cease and desist order for the tabloid. Alexandra placed her hands flat on the polished table, meeting each board member's gaze directly. The claims aren't baseless. Richard Grant is indeed Grace's biological father. He had no knowledge of her existence until recently. He is not seeking financial compensation or publicity. He's a good man who lost the woman he loved and never knew she had given him a child. The room erupted in chaos, voices overlapping in shock and dismay. You're confirming this random server is the biological father of your adopted daughter. Does he want money? Is this blackmail? The damage to the company's reputation could be catastrophic. Alexandra raised her hand for silence, her authority momentarily quieting the uproar. Richard Grant was involved with my best friend Sarah Parker before his military deployment. Sarah died shortly after giving birth to Grace. I adopted her child and have raised her as my own. Recently, Grace began asking questions about her biological father that I couldn't answer. I located Richard and discovered he had no knowledge of Grace's existence. He's not after money or publicity. He's a good man who deserves to know his daughter, and she deserves to know him. Then make him disappear, someone suggested coldly. Pay him off, get him to sign an NDA, make this go away. I won't do that to him, and I won't do that to Grace. Alexandra's voice remained steady despite her internal fury at the callous suggestion. Then you're choosing a waiter over this company, Chen stated flatly. The board will have no choice but to call for a vote of no confidence in your leadership. Alexandra gathered her materials, rising from her seat with deliberate calm. Do what you need to do. I'm going to tell my daughter the truth before she hears it from some reporter shoving a microphone in her face. She left the boardroom without further explanation, the weight of professional consequences temporarily secondary to the more important conversation awaiting her at home. As the elevator descended to the parking garage, Alexandra allowed herself a moment of uncertainty. The corporate empire her father had built, that she had expanded and improved, might slip from her grasp. The carefully cultivated, professional reputation she'd established over years of strategic leadership could crumble in days of scandal. Yet measuring those potential losses against Grace's right to know her father, against Richard's right to know his daughter, Alexandra found her resolve strengthening rather than weakening. Sarah would have wanted this truth revealed, would have brought Richard and Grace together herself had she lived. Alexandra had simply become the instrument of that intention, regardless of personal or professional cost. When Alexandra returned home, she found Richard and Grace sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, a plate of cookies between them, as Grace enthusiastically explained her solar system drawing. Both looked up at her entrance, Grace immediately running to hug her, while Richard remained seated, uncertainty evident in his posture. We made cookies, Grace announced proudly. Richard helped with the oven part. He's really nice, Mommy. Can he visit again sometime? Alexandra hugged Grace tightly, momentarily burying her face in the child's curls to compose herself before responding. Actually, sweetheart, that's something I wanted to talk with you about. Richard isn't just my friend. He was also a very special friend of your birth mommy, Sarah. Grace pulled back slightly, her expression shifting to intense focus, the same expression she wore when solving particularly challenging puzzles. Was he her boyfriend? He was. Alexandra guided Grace back to the living room, sitting beside her on the sofa, while Richard remained on the floor, giving them space for this initial explanation. In fact, Richard and your birth mommy Sarah loved each other very much. Grace's gaze darted between the adults, her quick mind clearly processing implications. Are you my birth daddy? The direct question addressed to Richard caught both adults by surprise despite their preparation. Richard nodded, emotion momentarily preventing verbal response. But you didn't know about me. Grace's question held no accusation, only curiosity as she assembled this new reality. No, sweetheart. Richard found his voice, careful to maintain eye contact despite the tears threatening to spill. Your birth mommy, Sarah, didn't get a chance to tell me about you before the accident. I just found out a few days ago, and I've been so excited to meet you properly. Grace absorbed this information with remarkable composure for her age, though her next question revealed the emotional undercurrent beneath her calm exterior. Why didn't you come find me before Alexandra intervened gently? Remember how I explained that Sarah died when you were just being born? She was the only one who knew Richard was your birth daddy. I didn't know how to find him until recently. This explanation seemed to satisfy Grace temporarily, though Alexandra recognized the conversation represented only the beginning of a longer process. Grace would have more questions as she processed the revelation, would need ongoing reassurance about how these new relationships would affect existing ones. Does this mean you're not my mommy anymore? Grace asked Alexandra, vulnerability finally breaking through her composed facade. Alexandra gathered Grace into her arms, her voice steady despite her own emotional turmoil. I will always, always be your mommy. Nothing will ever change that. Finding your birth daddy just means you have more people who love you now, like getting an extra present on your birthday. Grace considered this analogy, then turned to Richard with another direct question that demonstrated her practical nature. Do you have a mommy too? Richard smiled through unshed tears, grateful for the child's ability to cut through complexity to essential connections. I do. Her name is Sophie, and she's 3 years old. She's your sister. I have a sister. Grace's eyes widened, this revelation apparently more exciting than discovering her biological father. Does she live with you? Can I meet her? Does she like space too? The barrage of questions broke the emotional tension, allowing natural conversation to flow, as Richard described Sophie while Alexandra prepared a simple dinner. They avoided complex explanations about custody arrangements or future integration, focusing instead on establishing comfort with this new family configuration. Grace's resilience emerged throughout the evening as she processed information at her own pace, occasionally returning to earlier questions for clarification before moving forward. After Grace finally fell asleep exhausted by emotional processing and excitement about her newly discovered sister, Richard and Alexandra sat in the living room, mentally and emotionally drained by the day's events. She took it better than I expected. Richard spoke quietly, still processing the reality of having properly met his daughter. Alexandra nodded, her professional composure finally slipping to reveal her exhaustion. Grace has always been remarkably adaptable, but this is just the beginning. She'll have more questions, good days, and difficult ones. We need a consistent approach moving forward. How did the board meeting go? Richard asked, recognizing that Alexandra's professional challenges remained unresolved. About as expected. They want me to deny everything or make you disappear with an NDA. Alexandra's bitter laugh held no humor. When I refused, Chen suggested they'll call for a vote of no confidence. Richard absorbed the implications of guilt surfacing as he recognized the professional cost Alexandra faced for prioritizing his relationship with Grace. I never meant to jeopardize your career. If there's anything I can do, just be the father Grace deserves. Alexandra's direct gaze conveyed the seriousness of her request. That's all I ask. Whatever happens with the company, I can handle it. I've been preparing contingency plans since my father's stroke. This just accelerates the timeline. The simple statement revealed Alexandra's fundamental character, a woman who planned meticulously, who anticipated challenges and prepared accordingly, who sacrificed personal comfort for promises kept. Richard found himself respecting her beyond gratitude for raising his daughter, recognizing the strength required to navigate both corporate politics and personal integrity simultaneously. What happens tomorrow? Richard asked, attention returning to their more immediate concerns. We stick with normalcy as much as possible. I'll take Grace to school, explain the situation to her teacher and the principal. You should prepare Sophie to meet her sister this weekend. Something casual, perhaps the park where Grace feels comfortable. Alexandra's organizational mind had clearly mapped potential approaches despite the day's chaos. Meanwhile, I'll issue a public statement confirming the basic facts before speculation gets completely out of control. As Richard prepared to leave, Alexandra handed him a small silver key. The guest apartment on the 10th floor is yours whenever you need it. It's closer than East Boston when you're visiting Grace, and there's room for Sophie too. The doorman has instructions to admit you anytime. The practical solution aligned with Alexandra's methodical approach, though Richard hesitated, conscious of the power imbalance implicit in accepting such accommodation. I appreciate the offer, but I don't want to be indebted. This isn't charity, Richard. Alexandra's tone brooked no argument. It's about Grace having consistent access to her father without logistical complications. Consider it Sarah's apartment if that makes acceptance easier. She would have wanted this. The invocation of Sarah's wishes neutralized Richard's remaining resistance. He accepted the key, recognizing the gesture represented more than practical accommodation. It signified Alexandra's commitment to integrating him into Grace's life, despite the complications his presence created. Thank you, not just for this, but for everything. For finding me, for raising Grace, for handling today with such grace. I don't know that I could have navigated this situation with half your composure. Alexandra's smile held genuine warmth beneath evident exhaustion. Sarah chose well in both of us, I think. Now we just need to honor that choice by giving Grace the family she deserves, however unconventional its structure. As Richard departed the penthouse, the city lights illuminated his path toward an uncertain but hopeful future. One where his daughter would know him, where the promise of family extended beyond conventional boundaries, where loss had somehow transformed into unexpected second chances. The photograph Alexandra had given him rested in his wallet, a tangible reminder of the daughter he'd just properly met. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Explaining Grace to Sophie, weathering media attention, navigating co-parenting across socioeconomic divides. But tonight, Richard allowed himself to feel simple gratitude for the unexpected gift of his daughter's existence and for the remarkable woman who had preserved his place in her life, despite every reason to do otherwise. Sometimes the family you need isn't where you start, but where you eventually find yourself. For Richard Grant, that journey had just begun. Morning dawned gray and threatening, matching Richard's mood as he prepared for another day of uncertainty. The tabloid story had exploded overnight, his phone buzzing with texts from confused coworkers who'd seen his face plastered across news sites. Mike had called twice, leaving increasingly concerned voicemails about whatever mess Richard had gotten himself into. Even Mrs. Wilson had questions when he picked up Sophie, though she'd tactfully limited herself to asking if everything was all right with that nice lady from the other day. Nothing was all right. Nothing had been all right since Alexandra Holt walked into Daybreak Cafe and shattered the careful reconstruction of his post-military life. Yet beneath the anxiety churned a current of anticipation. He had a daughter, a beautiful, intelligent daughter, who now knew he existed. Sophie sat at the kitchen table methodically dissecting her dinosaur-shaped pancakes while Richard rehearsed explanations in his head. How did you tell a 3-year-old that she suddenly had an older sister, that their family was about to expand in ways he himself barely comprehended? "Daddy, can I wear my purple shoes to the park?" The innocent question jolted Richard from his reverie. The park, where he'd promised to take Sophie after breakfast, where they might meet Grace tomorrow, if all went according to Alexandra's carefully structured plan. A plan that now seemed woefully inadequate, given yesterday's media explosion. Richard crouched beside Sophie's chair, meeting her eye level. "Hey, Soph, remember how I told you that before I met your mommy I had another special friend named Sarah?" Sophie nodded, dinosaur fork suspended midair. "The lady in the picture on your shelf." "That's right. Well, Sarah and I had a baby girl before I knew about her. Her name is Grace, and she's 6 years old. That makes her your big sister." Sophie's brow furrowed in concentration as she processed this information. Where has she been? She's been living with her other mommy, a nice lady named Alexandra. Sarah got very sick when Grace was born, like how the dinosaurs got sick from the asteroid. The dinosaur analogy, Sophie's framework for understanding catastrophe, seemed to click. Sophie's eyes widened with comprehension. "And now Grace is coming to live with us." "Not exactly. She'll stay with Alexandra, but she'll visit us sometimes. And we can visit her too." Sophie considered this arrangement, her young mind adapting with the remarkable flexibility children often display. "Is she nice? Does she like dinosaurs too?" "She's very nice. I'm not sure about dinosaurs, but she likes drawing and space. Maybe you can show her your dinosaurs when you meet her." The simplicity of Sophie's concerns, whether her new sister would share her interests rather than the complex adult implications, reminded Richard that children often navigated emotional terrain more directly than adults. While he agonized over custody arrangements and socioeconomic disparities, Sophie focused on the immediate reality of potential connection. His phone buzzed with a text from Alexandra. "Press statement going out in 30 minutes. Board meeting at noon. How's Sophie taking the news?" Richard typed a quick response, better than expected, mostly concerned about whether Grace likes dinosaurs. Alexandra's reply came seconds later. "Typical kid wisdom, focusing on what matters. Bring Sophie to the penthouse tomorrow instead of the park. Weather looks bad and we'll have more privacy from photographers." The mention of photographers sent a chill through Richard. He hadn't considered that aspect. Public curiosity extending beyond social media to actual people with cameras tracking their movements. The military had trained him for many scenarios, but navigating sudden public scrutiny with a 3-year-old hadn't been covered in any manual. "Daddy, are you famous now?" Sophie asked, noticing his distracted expression. "Not famous, Soph. Just in the news a little bit. Sometimes grown-ups get very interested in other people's business." Richard helped Sophie finish breakfast, then settled her with crayons and paper while he checked his email. Alexandra had forwarded her press statement, its carefully crafted paragraphs transforming their messy human situation into sanitized corporate speak. Horizon Properties confirms that CEO Alexandra Holt has been raising Grace Parker, the biological daughter of her late friend Sarah Parker, and Richard Grant following Sarah's tragic death 6 years ago. Mr. Grant was unaware of his daughter's existence until recently, having been deployed with the U.S. Air Force when Ms. Parker discovered her pregnancy. Horizon Properties fully supports Ms. Holt's decision to facilitate a relationship between Mr. Grant and his daughter. We request privacy for all parties during this family transition. The statement acknowledged the basic facts while offering minimal personal details. Typical Alexandra controlling the narrative with precision. Richard wondered how much the careful wording had been shaped by corporate attorneys versus Alexandra's own instinct for self-protection. Regardless, it provided a framework for public understanding that might dampen the more salacious speculation. His phone rang. Mike from the cafe calling for the third time that morning. Richard answered reluctantly, bracing for uncomfortable questions. So it's true, Mike's normally jovial voice sounded strained. You've got a kid with the CEO of Horizon Properties? Not exactly. I had a relationship with someone named Sarah years ago. She died after giving birth to our daughter. Alexandra Holt was her friend and adopted the baby. I didn't know any of this until a few days ago. The explanation sounded hollow even to Richard's ears, too neatly packaged for the messy emotional reality. Mike's skeptical silence suggested similar doubts. Look, I know how it sounds, but it's the truth. I found out I have a 6-year-old daughter I never knew existed. I'm still figuring out what that means. Mike sighed heavily. I get it. Life's complicated. But Richard, this puts the cafe in a weird position. We've got reporters calling asking about you. That CFO guy came back looking for you this morning. Things are getting intense. The implicit message hung between them. Richard's personal situation was becoming a liability for the small business. His heart sank at the realization that even his modest employment might be jeopardized by circumstances beyond his control. I understand. Do you need me to take some time off until this blows over? Mike's hesitation spoke volumes. Maybe that's best. Paid leave 2 weeks. Let's reassess after that. After ending the call, Richard stared at the wall, absorbing this latest complication. 2 weeks without income would strain his already tight budget, especially with the additional expenses that would inevitably come with integrating Grace into his life. Yet the time off might provide opportunity to focus on building relationships without juggling work responsibilities. Richard was contemplating these trade-offs when his phone chimed with an unknown number. Fearing another reporter, he almost declined before curiosity prompted him to answer. Mr. Grant. The unfamiliar female voice sounded professionally detached. This is Patricia Wilson, chairperson of Horizon Properties Board of Directors. I'd like to schedule a meeting with you this afternoon to discuss the current situation. Richard's military training kicked in his voice, automatically adopting the respectful tone he'd used with superior officers. Ma'am, I'm not sure what there is to discuss. This is a personal matter between Alexandra Grace and me. Mr. Grant, when the CEO of a publicly traded company finds herself at the center of a potential scandal, it ceases to be merely personal. The board has fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders, whose investments have already declined 7% since yesterday's news broke. The subtle threat beneath the corporate jargon wasn't lost on Richard. I'm sorry about your stock prices, but I'm not giving up my daughter to make your investors happy. Patricia Wilson's laugh held no warmth. No one's asking you to give up anything, Mr. Grant. Quite the opposite. The board would like to offer you a position with Horizon Properties, Community Relations Manager for our Veteran Housing Initiative. The salary is $120,000 annually with full benefits and flexible hours to accommodate your parental responsibilities. The amount, nearly 4 times his current income, momentarily stunned Richard into silence. When he found his voice, suspicion had replaced shock. Why would you offer me a job? The chairperson's response came without hesitation. First, your military background and current economic circumstances make you ideally qualified to understand the needs of veterans transitioning to civilian life, a demographic we're specifically targeting with our East Harbor development. Second, bringing you into the Horizon family, so to speak, transforms a potentially negative news story into a positive one about corporate responsibility and family reconciliation. Third, it allows us to implement a non-disclosure agreement regarding certain aspects of this situation as part of your employment contract. The calculated manipulation behind the offer disgusted Richard, even as a small part of him recognized its tempting practicality. Such a position would solve his financial constraints, provide better opportunities for Sophie, and facilitate more consistent interaction with Grace. Yet accepting would place him under the board's control, potentially compromising his autonomy in personal decisions regarding his daughter. I need time to consider this offer. Of course. We'll expect your answer by Monday morning. Patricia Wilson's voice conveyed absolute confidence in his eventual acceptance. In the meantime, I suggested avoiding further media interaction. Goodbye, Mr. Grant. Richard barely had time to process this conversation before his phone buzzed with an incoming text from Alexander. Board called emergency session. Chen pushing for no confidence vote. Need to talk after. The cascade of complications accelerated beyond Richard's ability to navigate them individually. His job at the cafe effectively suspended, a suspiciously convenient position offered by people who clearly viewed him as a problem to be managed. Alexandra's leadership position threatened by their connection, all while two innocent children awaited decisions that would reshape their understanding of family. Richard glanced at Sophie happily coloring dinosaurs at the kitchen table, blissfully unaware of the adult chaos swirling around her existence. Her innocence underscored the stakes, not just his relationship with Grace, but Sophie's stability and security hung in the balance of choices made in corporate boardrooms and media narratives neither child could comprehend. The complexity felt overwhelming, far removed from the straightforward challenges of military service or even single parenthood. In the Air Force, objectives had been clear chains of command, established missions defined by parameters everyone understood. Fatherhood had its complications, but Richard had navigated them through instinct and commitment, learning as he went. This new territory, where personal relationships intersected with corporate politics and public scrutiny, offered no clear protocols or established best practices. For the first time since Alexandra had whispered those life-changing words in the cafe, Richard felt truly out of his depth, uncertain how to protect both daughters from the adult complications surrounding their connection. Alexandra stood before the assembled board members, outwardly composed despite the turmoil of the past 24 hours. The boardroom's floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Boston's financial district, a vista she normally found energizing. Today, it merely emphasized the distance between the corporate world she navigated and the personal challenges awaiting her at home. Robert Chen had just finished a detailed presentation on the projected financial impact of the current situation, his carefully neutral terminology barely masking obvious satisfaction at her predicament. Stock prices had dropped nearly 7% since the tabloid story broke. Several major investors had requested private calls with board members, bypassing Alexandra entirely. Social media buzzed with speculation ranging from corporate conspiracy theories to salacious fiction about her relationship with Richard. The board has no choice but to consider temporary leadership restructuring until this matter resolves. Chen's statement, positioned as reluctant recommendation rather than the power grab it actually represented, drew murmurs of agreement from several board members. Perhaps Ms. Holt would benefit from administrative leave, allowing her to focus on personal matters while the company stabilizes. Alexandra surveyed the faces around the table, mentally cataloging allies versus opportunists. Most expressions revealed calculated neutrality, waiting to see which way power would shift before committing support. Only Patricia Wilson's slight smile suggested a different agenda, though Alexandra couldn't decipher its meaning. I appreciate the concern for my personal circumstances. Alexandra kept her voice measured, projecting calm authority despite internal fury at Chen's transparent maneuvers. However, this company has faced far more significant challenges under my leadership. The 2020 pandemic, supply chain disruptions, 3 major market corrections. Throughout those actual crises, our long-term strategy has consistently outperformed industry averages because this board trusted my judgment. I find it remarkable that my personal decision to honor my best friend's dying wish by raising her child now constitutes grounds for leadership restructuring. The calculated reference to Sarah, humanizing what Chen had deliberately framed as corporate liability, shifted the emotional temperature in the room. Several board members who had avoided eye contact now engaged directly, their expressions softening slightly. Alexandra pressed this advantage. Horizon Properties has built its reputation on family values and community investment. Our housing developments emphasize multi-generational living spaces and community amenities, specifically because we understand that successful businesses support rather than sacrifice family connections. My decision to facilitate a relationship between Grace and her biological father directly aligns with those core corporate values. If we abandon them when personally inconvenient, we undermine our entire brand identity. Chen's expression hardened as he recognized Alexandra's strategic reframing. This isn't about values, it's about stability. Your judgment is compromised by emotional entanglement with an unvetted individual whose sudden appearance threatens corporate interests. Patricia Wilson raised her hand, slightly interjecting before Alexandra could respond. Actually, Robert, I've taken the liberty of addressing that particular concern. I've offered Mr. Grant a position with our Veteran Housing Initiative, leveraging his military background and current economic circumstances to benefit our East Harbor development while bringing him under appropriate contractual obligations regarding discretion. Alexandra's carefully maintained composure faltered momentarily as she absorbed this unexpected development. The board chairperson had unilaterally approached Richard with a job offer, presumably including confidentiality provisions that would restrict his ability to discuss certain aspects of their situation publicly. The strategic maneuver simultaneously neutralized Chen's argument about Richard being unvetted while establishing board control over his relationship with Horizon Properties. I see. Alexandra recovered quickly, mind racing to assess implications. Has Mr. Grant accepted this position? He's considering the offer. Patricia's smile remained enigmatic. He seemed appropriately appreciative of the opportunity, particularly given his current employment situation. The subtle emphasis on current employment suggested Patricia had intelligence about Richard beyond what Alexandra had shared. Perhaps knowledge of his suspended position at the cafe, information that would require active investigation rather than passive awareness. The realization that board members were monitoring Richard's movements amplified Alexandra's concerns about their intentions toward her daughter and her father. While we await Mr. Grant's decision, I propose we table the leadership discussion. Patricia addressed the full board, now effectively closing Chen's attempted power grab. Alexandra has demonstrated remarkable judgment throughout this unexpected situation. The press statement was appropriately transparent without inviting unnecessary speculation. Grace's well-being has been consistently prioritized. These actions reflect precisely the thoughtful leadership we've come to expect. Chen's jaw tightened visibly, though he maintained professional composure. I withdraw my recommendation for administrative leave with the understanding that we'll revisit the matter should circumstances change. The concession, clearly reluctant, nevertheless diffused immediate threat to Alexandra's position. The meeting proceeded to regular business matters, though tension lingered beneath superficial collegiality. By adjournment, Alexandra had maintained her leadership role, but recognized the precarious nature of her standing. The board, particularly Patricia Wilson, had demonstrated willingness to intervene in matters she considered personal, blurring boundaries between corporate governance and family decisions. As board members filed out, Patricia lingered behind, waiting until the room cleared before addressing Alexandra directly. That went rather well, all things considered. Alexandra gathered her materials, maintaining professional distance despite churning emotions. Offering Richard a position without consulting me crosses several lines, Patricia. The older woman shrugged, unperturbed by the criticism. Sometimes lines need crossing when people we care about won't protect themselves. Your father would have done exactly the same. The reference to Alexandra's father, Patricia's longtime friend and business partner before his stroke, landed with calculated precision. Thomas Holt had built Horizon Properties through aggressive strategic moves that occasionally bypassed conventional corporate protocol, establishing dominance rather than requesting permission. Patricia had clearly viewed her unilateral approach to Richard as continuation of that leadership philosophy. My father would have respected my autonomy regarding my daughter. Would he? Patricia's raised eyebrow conveyed skepticism. Thomas prioritized family security above personal sensibilities. He would have recognized the vulnerability your current arrangement creates and moved to stabilize it exactly as I've done. Mr. Grant needs financial security to be an effective co-parent. We need contractual parameters to protect corporate interests. This solution addresses both concerns. The pragmatic assessment, however presumptuous, contained elements of truth Alexandra couldn't entirely dismiss. Richard's economic circumstances created inherent imbalance in their co-parenting relationship. His cafe position, already compromised by media attention, provided neither the income nor flexibility required for building consistent relationship with Grace. The board's job offer, while manipulative in timing and intent, potentially addressed practical considerations Alexandra had privately worried about. I would have preferred discussion before action, and I would prefer not reading about Horizon's CEO in tabloid headlines. Patricia gathered her belongings, conversation clearly concluded in her mind. But we all make accommodations for circumstances beyond ideal. Your father understood that. I believe you do too. Alexandra watched Patricia depart, conflicted emotions preventing immediate response. The board chairperson had effectively neutralized the immediate leadership threat while simultaneously establishing parameters around Alexandra's personal decisions regarding Grace and Richard. The mixed victory left Alexandra uncertain whether to feel grateful for the professional reprieve or resentful of the personal intrusion. Her phone chimed with incoming text. Richard confirming tomorrow's meeting at the penthouse, mentioning Patricia Wilson's job offer with obvious confusion about its implications. Alexandra began composing response, then deleted the draft, recognizing the conversation required nuance beyond text messages could provide. Instead, she gathered her materials and headed toward the parking garage, determined to address the situation directly rather than through corporate intermediaries. The drive to East Boston took longer than anticipated afternoon traffic, clogging highways despite threatening rain. Alexandra used the time to organize her thoughts, separating professional considerations from personal priorities. By the time she parked outside Richard's modest apartment building, she had formulated an approach that balanced corporate realities with family needs. Richard answered her knock with Sophie balanced on his hip, the toddler regarding Alexandra with open curiosity rather than shyness. The apartment beyond revealed meticulous organization despite limited space and modest furnishings. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator. Educational toys occupied strategic locations. Every visible element suggested careful attention to creating nurturing environment within economic constraints. So you've met Patricia Wilson. Alexandra entered at Richard's gesture, noting Sophie's immediate interest in her designer handbag. The toddler clearly possessed her half-sister's eye for quality accessories. Richard set Sophie down, directing her toward crayons and paper on the kitchen table before responding. She offered me a job. I'm not qualified for its salary. That makes no sense. What's really happening? The direct question. Absent corporate diplomatic filters, oddly refreshed Alexandra after hours navigating boardroom subterfuge. Board politics. Chen tried pushing me out using this situation as leverage. Patricia countered by neutralizing you as potential liability. If you're a Horizon employee with signed-in confidentiality agreements, you become asset rather than threat in their risk assessment. Richard processed this explanation, military background, evident in his analytical approach to unfamiliar strategic terrain. So this job offer isn't about my qualifications. It's about controlling the situation. Partially. Alexandra watched Sophie carefully coloring, struck by the child's focused determination, a quality Grace shared despite their different genetics. But Patricia wasn't entirely wrong about alignment of interests. The position would provide stability for you and Sophie, flexibility for building relationship with Grace, and professional development beyond service industry. Richard's expression hardened slightly. I don't need charity employment. It's not charity if you actually do the job, Richard. Alexandra modulated her tone, recognizing his pride while emphasizing practicality. The Veteran Housing Initiative needs someone with military background who understands transition challenges. Your technical training and personal experience qualify you for the position. The timing and circumstances of the offer are admittedly manipulative, but the opportunity itself has merit worth considering. The balanced assessment, acknowledging both the strategic corporate maneuvering and genuine opportunity, seemed to reach Richard where pure corporate positioning might have failed. His expression shifted from defensive to thoughtfully evaluative as he considered implications beyond immediate reaction to perceived charity. Would I report directly to you, Mo? You'd work under David Martinez in community development, separate department, different reporting structure. Alexandra recognized the importance of this distinction both for corporate propriety and Richard's personal dignity. Your performance would be evaluated on standard metrics, not personal connection to me or Grace. Richard glanced at Sophie, who had abandoned coloring to investigate Alexandra's high-heeled boots with curious fingers. What about childcare? My current sitter can't handle full-time hours, and decent daycare costs more than I can afford, even with that salary. The practical concern, focused on Sophie's needs rather than his own pride, elevated Alexandra's already growing respect for Richard's parenting priorities. Horizon offers subsidized childcare at headquarters. Several executives bring their children regularly. Sophie would have structured activities, qualified supervision, and interaction with other kids her age. The comprehensive solution to his immediate practical concern seemed to disarm Richard's remaining resistance. His shoulders relaxed slightly as he processed potential benefits for Sophie: socialization, educational opportunities, consistent routine, beyond the obvious financial advantages for himself. I still don't like feeling manipulated by your board. That makes two of us. Alexandra's dry response prompted unexpected smile from Richard, momentary shared understanding transcending their different backgrounds. Patricia Wilson has played corporate chess longer than either of us. In this particular match, her moves happen to benefit everyone despite questionable motivation. Sometimes winning strategy means recognizing advantageous position regardless of how you reached it. The military-adjacent framing resonated with Richard, whose expression suggested recognition of familiar strategic principle, despite unfamiliar context. I'll think about it. But I need to be clear about something. Any decisions about Grace and our relationship going forward can't be controlled by corporate contracts or board expectations. She's not a business asset to be managed. Absolutely not. Alexandra's immediate emphatic agreement revealed genuine maternal protectiveness beyond corporate calculation. Grace's well-being comes before Horizon Properties or anyone's professional considerations. That's non-negotiable. The shared priority, placing Grace above corporate politics despite their different relationships with her, established common ground that transcended socioeconomic disparities and circumstantial complications. For a brief moment, Alexandra glimpsed potential partnership beyond awkward co-parenting arrangement necessitated by biological connection. Richard's instinctive prioritization of both daughters' needs, his resistance to corporate manipulation despite personal advantage, suggested character traits she hadn't fully appreciated during initial evaluation. Sophie interrupted their moment of connection by tugging Alexandra's sleeve, small face upturned in earnest question. Are you Grace's mommy? The innocent inquiry, penetrating complex adult circumstances with childlike directness, momentarily startled Alexandra. She crouched to Sophie's level, responding with carefully considered honesty. Yes, I am. Just like your mommy was. Your mommy, I'm Grace's mommy. Sophie nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation. She processed the information with remarkable matter-of-factness before asking follow-up question that revealed surprising emotional intelligence for her age. Does Grace want to meet me? Alexandra smiled, genuinely recognizing opportunity to bridge gap between households through children's natural curiosity. She's very excited to meet you. She's been asking lots of questions about her new sister. Sophie beamed at this information, clearly pleased with the prospect of older siblings' interest. I'm going to show her my dinosaurs, the biggest ones first. The simple statement, Sophie already planning specific interaction with a sister she hadn't yet met, demonstrated children's remarkable capacity for adapting to changing family circumstances when adults provided appropriate support. While Richard and Alexandra navigated complicated adult considerations around corporate politics and co-parenting logistics, Sophie focused on immediate relationship potential with characteristic childlike optimism. Alexandra checked her watch, reluctantly aware of pending conference calls scheduled before she could collect Grace from her after-school program. I need to go, but we'll see you both tomorrow morning, around 10. Richard nodded, lifting Sophie as she raised arms in universal toddler request to be held. We'll be there, weather permitting. Maybe we could take the girls for ice cream after they meet. Something normal might help everyone adjust. The suggestion, prioritizing normalcy for children amidst abnormal circumstances, further confirmed Alexandra's evolving assessment of Richard's parental instincts. Perfect. Grace would love that. She's been talking nonstop about meeting Sophie since I mentioned having a sister. As Alexandra departed, she felt cautious optimism despite ongoing professional complications. Tomorrow's meeting would begin actual integration of their previously separate families. Messy, unpredictable process without corporate strategic plans or measurable quarterly objectives. Yet the foundation seems surprisingly solid, two adults committed to children's well-being above personal comfort or professional advantage, two children apparently open to expanding their understanding of family. The following morning arrived with steady rainfall that matched the solemnity of the occasion. Richard and Sophie arrived at Alexandra's building 15 minutes early, Sophie bouncing with excitement while Richard attempted to manage his nervousness. The doorman welcomed them with practiced professionalism, directing them to the private elevator serving penthouse floors. Sophie watched in fascination as numbers illuminated sequentially small, hand-gripping her father's tightly despite her outward enthusiasm. Alexandra opened the door before they could knock, Grace partially hidden behind her legs, despite previous excitement about meeting her sister and father. The moment crystallized the strangeness of their situation. Two children biologically connected, yet complete strangers. Two adults linked through circumstances rather than choice. Four lives irrevocably altered by revelation. Neither child had requested nor fully understood. Richard crouched to Grace's eye level, respecting her temporary shyness rather than forcing interaction. "Hi, Grace. I'm really happy to see you again. This is Sophie, who's been very excited to meet her big sister." The careful introduction, acknowledging Grace's agency while gently encouraging connection, seemed perfectly calibrated to the moment. Grace emerged slightly from behind Alexandra, studying Sophie with cautious interest rather than maintaining full retreat. "Hi, Sophie." The simple greeting broke initial tension, allowing natural childhood curiosity to overcome momentary uncertainty. Sophie immediately launched into enthusiastic introduction of the dinosaur toy she'd insisted on bringing, explaining its scientific classification with adorable mispronunciations that made Grace smile despite lingering shyness. Alexandra gestured them inside, where she'd arranged an informal breakfast spread of fruit pastries and juice. The penthouse's open floor plan allowed adults to observe children from slight distance, giving the sisters space to establish connection without hovering interference. Grace gradually relaxed as Sophie's unguarded enthusiasm proved contagious, the age gap temporarily bridged by Sophie's advanced vocabulary and Grace's patient interest in her younger sister's dinosaur expertise. "They're doing better than I expected." Alexandra kept her voice low. Observation meant only for Richard as they watched the girls gradually move from parallel play to interactive conversation. Richard nodded, tension visibly easing as initial meeting progressed without emotional complications either adult had feared. Kids adapt quickly when adults don't project their own anxiety. Military families learn that early. Children take emotional cues from parents during transitions. The insight, drawn from experience rather than parenting books or child psychology courses, reflected practical wisdom. Alexandra respected, despite its different origin, from her research-based approach to parenting challenges. "You're probably right. I've been so worried about how Grace would respond that I might have inadvertently made her more anxious." Their conversation shifted to logistics, how often Richard and Grace might reasonably see each other initially, whether weekday or weekend visits made more sense, how school schedules and Richard's work situation, whatever that might become, would impact arrangements. The discussion remained focused on practical considerations rather than emotional complications, both adults seemingly more comfortable with tangible planning than abstract feelings. A crash from the living area interrupted their planning session. They turned to find Sophie standing beside a broken crystal vase, water and flowers scattered across hardwood floor, her expression transitioning from shock to imminent tears. Grace stood nearby, already moving to help before adults could intervene. "It's okay, Sophie. We can clean it up." Grace's immediate response, comforting rather than blaming her younger sister, revealed natural empathy that transcended their brief acquaintance. "Accidents happen." The simple statement, "accidents happen," echoed phrase Alexandra often used when Grace made mistakes, suggesting the 6-year-old had internalized forgiveness principle and now extended it to her newly discovered sister. The moment crystallized possibility that these children might genuinely connect beyond biological relation, forming bond based on mutual acceptance rather than obligation. As Richard helped Sophie clean up broken glass while Grace collected scattered flowers, Alexandra observed the tableau with unexpected emotional clarity. These four people, thrown together by circumstances none had chosen, We're navigating unfamiliar territory with remarkable grace, despite societal expectations and corporate complications surrounding their unconventional family structure. The realization shifted something fundamental in Alexandra's perception of their situation, transforming challenge into potential opportunity for creating family defined by choice rather than convention. Life rarely offers perfect circumstances. Alexandra spoke softly, voicing realization that had gradually crystallized throughout morning's interactions. But sometimes it gives us exactly the people we need, even when they arrive in unexpected ways. Richard glanced up from where he knelt beside Sophie, his expression suggesting similar revelation beneath pragmatic exterior. Maybe family isn't about perfect beginnings. Maybe it's about who shows up every day after the story gets complicated. The shared understanding, transcending their different backgrounds and circumstances, established foundation for moving forward together despite inevitable complications awaiting them beyond penthouse walls. Whatever corporate politics, media speculation, or societal judgments might come, the four people in that room had begun process of defining family on their own terms. Through water-streaked windows, rain continued falling on Boston streets below, washing away yesterday's certainties while nourishing possibility of tomorrow's unexpected growth. The press conference announcing Richard's new role as Director of Veteran Outreach for the Horizon Foundation unfolded with carefully orchestrated precision. Alexandra stood at the podium projecting calm authority, despite the army of reporters and flashing cameras. Richard stood slightly behind her military posture, evident in his straight spine and squared shoulders, though his eyes betrayed discomfort with the public scrutiny. This partnership represents Horizon's ongoing commitment to supporting military families and addressing affordable housing needs in our community. Alexandra's practiced corporate voice revealed none of the private negotiations and board manipulations that had preceded this moment. Grant's firsthand experience with military transition challenges brings invaluable perspective to our veteran housing initiatives. Richard stepped forward at her gesture, clearing his throat before delivering his portion of the carefully scripted statement. 6 years in the Air Force taught me that the hardest battles sometimes come after returning home. Finding affordable housing, rebuilding family connections, and securing meaningful employment represent significant challenges for many veterans. I'm grateful for the opportunity to help address these needs through Horizon's community programs. The statement, crafted by Alexandra's PR team and rehearsed multiple times, emphasized Richard's military credentials while strategically avoiding direct mention of Grace or their personal connection. The calculated omission represented compromise between transparency and privacy, acknowledging public curiosity without feeding tabloid speculation. Reporters shouted questions when the formal statements concluded, most focused on the personal relationship Alexandra had deliberately left unaddressed. Is this a PR move to distract from recent scandals? How will you balance professional and personal relationships? Does your daughter approve of this arrangement? Alexandra raised a hand, temporarily quieting the clamor. Mr. Grant's appointment reflects his qualifications and our organizational needs. We've both been clear about our shared priority, the well-being of Grace and her younger sister Sophie. We appreciate respect for their privacy as we navigate this family transition. Thank you. With practiced poise, Alexandra guided Richard from the podium before reporters could press further security personnel, creating buffer between them and persistent journalists. Once safely inside the private elevator, Richard exhaled tension he'd been holding throughout the 15-minute press conference. That was worse than basic training evaluations. His attempt at humor barely masked genuine discomfort with public scrutiny. How do you do this regularly? Alexandra's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing the strain beneath her composed exterior. You learn to compartmentalize, separate the public persona from the private person. After a while, it becomes automatic, like putting on a uniform. The military analogy, deliberately chosen to connect with Richard's experience, landed effectively. His expression suggested recognition of familiar psychological mechanism despite different context. Makes sense. Different mission, similar mental discipline. The elevator opened directly into the executive suite where Patricia Wilson awaited their return. The board chairperson's critical gaze assessed their performance before she offered minimal approval. Acceptable presentation. The personal questions will continue, but your non-answers established appropriate boundaries. The stock has already recovered 3 points since the announcement. Alexandra resisted urge to roll her eyes at Patricia's focus on stock price over human considerations. Market validation wasn't her primary concern, though she recognized its importance to board members and investors whose support she still needed. We'll continue emphasizing Richard's professional qualifications and military background. The media will eventually lose interest when they realize there's no scandal to uncover. Patricia's skeptical expression suggested less optimism about media attention span. Perhaps, in the meantime, Mr. Grant's office has been prepared on the community development floor. David Martinez will provide orientation this afternoon. The immediate transition from press conference to workplace integration reflected Patricia's pragmatic efficiency. No time would be wasted in establishing Richard's legitimate professional presence, reinforcing narrative that his connection to Horizon transcended personal relationship with Alexandra. Richard nodded his acknowledgement, though tension lingered in his shoulders. "I appreciate the opportunity, Ms. Wilson." Patricia's assessing gaze softened marginally, perhaps recognizing genuine gratitude beneath obligatory politeness. "You earned this position through your service, Mr. Grant. Now you have opportunity to extend that service to others facing similar transitions. Don't waste it trying to prove yourself worthy. Focus instead on making meaningful impact for those who need advocacy." The unexpected encouragement, cutting through corporate positioning to address Richard's unspoken concerns about perceived charity, revealed depth beneath Patricia's calculating exterior. Her strategic maneuvering had unquestionably served corporate interests, yet her understanding of Richard's pride suggested awareness of human considerations beyond business calculations. After Patricia departed, Alexandra checked her watch with apologetic expression. "I need to prepare for the investor call at 11. David will show you everything you need to know about the department. We'll touch base after work regarding tomorrow's plans with the girls." The question, balancing professional separation with personal connection, epitomized the complex relationship they now navigated. Colleagues during business hours, co-parents after 5, their lives had become intertwined in ways neither had anticipated when Alexandra walked into Daybreak Cafe 3 weeks earlier. Richard nodded, straightening his tie, an unconscious gesture of preparation. "I'll pick up both girls from the company daycare at 5, if that works for you." Sophie's excited about showing Grace her new classroom. The casual reference to their daughter's budding relationship, Grace had quickly embraced role of protective older sister while Sophie worshipped her with unabashed admiration, brought genuine smile to Alexandra's face. "Perfect, Monsieur, and thank you, Richard, for all of this. I know it wasn't what you expected when I found you." Richard's expression softened momentarily, professional distance, giving way to shared understanding. Life rarely delivers what we expect. Sometimes it gives us what we need instead. The simple statement, philosophical reflection rather than corporate platitude, represented evolution in their relationship over the whirlwind 3 weeks since Alexandra's revelation. From strangers connected by shocking revelation to reluctant co-parents to cautious allies, they had navigated unfamiliar territory with increasing synchronicity despite occasional missteps. Alexandra watched Richard depart toward his orientation meeting, reflecting on unexpected journey that had brought them to this point. Their unconventional family arrangement remained fragile, vulnerable to corporate politics and public scrutiny, yet somehow functioning beyond initial expectations. The girls had adapted with remarkable resilience, quickly establishing connection that transcended their different upbringings. Richard had navigated dramatic career transition with determination and dignity, despite obvious discomfort with corporate environment. The investor call would demand Alexandra's complete attention, explaining recent developments in terms that emphasize strategic benefits while minimizing personal complications. Yet for a brief moment before shifting fully into CEO mode, she allowed herself to acknowledge private reality. Beneath public narrative, they were building something valuable, not just managing scandal or protecting corporate interests, but creating family defined by choice rather than convention. The first month of Richard's employment at Horizon passed in blur of adjustments and discoveries. The learning curve proved steep. Corporate software systems, interdepartmental politics, budget approval processes. Yet his military training had prepared him well for absorbing complex protocols under pressure. David Martinez, the community development director, provided patient guidance through unfamiliar terrain, offering context without condescension. Richard's first project focused on assessing veteran housing needs across Boston's neighborhoods, identifying gaps in existing programs and opportunities for Horizon's intervention. The work engaged his analytical skills while connecting with personal experience, creating meaningful bridge between military past and corporate present. His status as recent transition case himself lent authenticity to his interactions with veteran focus groups, establishing credibility that his Horizon credentials alone couldn't have provided. The professional adjustment progressed more smoothly than Richard had anticipated, yet personal transitions proved more complicated. The practical matters, moving Sophie into Horizon's daycare program, establishing visitation schedule with Grace, navigating co-parenting communication with Alexandra, had been resolved with relative efficiency. The emotional landscape, however, remained unsettled, particularly regarding his relationship with Grace. Their interactions had evolved from initial awkwardness to growing comfort with Grace, increasingly seeking his attention and approval. She proudly introduced him to her friends as "my dad who was in the Air Force," her enthusiasm suggesting Alexandra had reinforced positive narrative about his absence rather than allowing resentment to develop. Yet Richard sensed lingering uncertainty beneath Grace's apparent adjustment, occasional hesitation before physical affection, careful observation of his interactions with Sophie, subtle testing of boundaries to assess consistency of his responses. One Sunday afternoon during scheduled time with both girls at his apartment, Richard discovered Grace sitting quietly on Sophie's bed, holding framed photograph of Sophie as infant with her mother. The image, one of few Richard displayed from his brief marriage, captured moment of maternal tenderness that Grace had never experienced with Sarah. "Do I look like her?" "My real mom." Grace's question emerged without preamble, catching Richard unprepared for conversation he'd known would eventually come. Richard sat beside her, allowing moment to consider his response rather than rushing through uncomfortable topic. "You have her curls and her smile. Your laugh sounds just like hers too. But mostly you have her kind heart. Your mom could always tell when someone needed help, just like you do with Sophie." Grace studied the photograph, thoughtfully processing connection to woman she knew only through stories and secondhand memories. "Mommy Alexandra says my real mom wanted me very much, but she got sick when I was being born." The careful phrasing, "Mommy Alexandra" and "real mom," revealed Grace's developing framework for understanding her complex family structure. At 6, she had begun distinguishing biological connection from parental relationship, though emotional implications remained incompletely processed. "That's true. Your mom Sarah was my best friend in the whole world." Richard chose words carefully, balancing honesty with age-appropriate explanation. "She wanted to tell me about you, but there was an accident before she could. That's why I didn't know about you until recently." Grace's next question emerged after thoughtful pause, her expression revealing importance of answer to her developing understanding. "If you knew about me when I was born, would you have been my dad instead of mommy? Alexandra being my mom." The hypothetical pierced Richard's heart with unexpected force. 6 years of fatherhood lost milestones. Missed relationship with his daughter entrusted to someone else through circumstance rather than choice. Yet he recognized danger in suggesting alternative history that might undermine Grace's security in her relationship with Alexandra. "Your mommy Alexandra has been the perfect mom for you, Grace. Better than I could have been on my own." Richard kept his voice steady despite emotion tightening his throat. "If I'd known about you, we would have figured something out together. Me, your birth mom, and Alexandra. Different from how things happen, but still with lots of people loving you." The answer, acknowledging complexity while affirming existing attachments, seemed to satisfy Grace's immediate concern. She nodded solemnly before asking follow-up question that revealed her practical nature. "Will you stay my dad forever now? Even when Sophie's mom came back, you stayed her dad." The innocent comparison, drawing parallelization between her situation and information she gleaned about Sophie's mother, underscored children's tendency to construct narrative frameworks from limited information. Richard realized Grace had interpreted Sophie's mother's departure as temporary absence rather than permanent abandonment, perhaps creating expectation that parental figures might interchange or return unpredictably. "I will always, always be your dad, Grace. Nothing can ever change that." Richard wrapped arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "And Mommy Alexandra will always be your mom. We're both here for keeps." The simple promise, consistency amid Grace's experience of revelatory change, provided assurance her 6-year-old mind could grasp without overwhelming detail. Grace leaned against him, tension visibly easing from her small frame as she processed this confirmation of stability. Good, because I like having a dad and a sister. Even if Sophie doesn't know, dinosaurs aren't actually extinct. The abrupt shift to childhood pedantry, Grace had recently become fascinated with birds as living dinosaurs, broke emotional tension with unexpected humor. Richard laughed, grateful for resilience children often demonstrated when provided honest answers and emotional security. Later that evening, after both girls had fallen asleep during movie night, Sophie sprawled across his lap. Grace curled against his side. Richard texted Alexandra about the conversation, wanting her awareness of Grace's questions and his responses. Their co-parenting communication had evolved into efficient partnership with both prioritizing consistency between households and transparency about significant interactions. Alexandra's response came quickly. "Thank you for telling me. She's been processing a lot lately. Your answer was perfect. We're in this together for keeps." The simple affirmation, "for keeps," echoing his words to Grace, reinforced their developing partnership beyond corporate arrangement or circumstantial connection. Something fundamental had shifted between them over the past month, mutual respect and evolving from professional courtesy to genuine appreciation. They remained distinct personalities with different approaches to parenting, career, and life priorities, yet increasingly functioned as unified front where the girls were concerned. The following Tuesday, Alexandra called unexpectedly during Richard's lunch break, her tone conveying controlled urgency rather than casual check-in. "Do you have a moment? Something's come up with the East Harbor project that might impact our family situation." Richard stepped away from the cafeteria table he'd been sharing with colleagues, finding quiet corner to continue conversation. "What's happened? Robert Chen has assembled investor coalition pushing for luxury-only development plan. They're leveraging recent publicity around our personal situation to question my judgment regarding mixed-income housing. Board meeting tomorrow will include vote on project direction. The strategic maneuver, using personal circumstances to undermine Alexandra's professional position, aligned with Chen's previous attempts to consolidate power. Richard had observed enough corporate dynamics during his month at Horizon to recognize the calculated attack for what it was. How can I help? His immediate response, partnership rather than passive concern, reflected evolution in their relationship beyond formal co-parenting arrangement. Alexandra's brief hesitation suggested she'd expected different reaction. The veteran housing component is central to mixed income proposal. If you could prepare brief presentation on transitional housing needs and employment statistics for tomorrow's meeting, it might help counter purely profit-driven arguments. Data over drama, the request, professional collaboration rather than personal support, respected boundaries they'd established between their parental relationship and workplace interactions. Richard had deliberately maintained distance from Alexandra during business hours, establishing independent professional identity rather than leveraging personal connection. This would represent first direct collaboration on corporate matter crossing previously maintained separation. "Send me the meeting details. I'll have something ready." Richard's decisive response reflected growing confidence in his professional role despite its unconventional origins. "What time should I pick up the girls tomorrow?" The mundane follow-up question, maintaining normal routine despite corporate crisis, seemed to reassure Alexandra. Her voice relaxed slightly. "5 should work. Thank you, Richard, for everything." The board meeting unfolded with tense formality, Robert Chen presenting luxury development plan with polished slides emphasizing profit margins and shareholder returns. His presentation strategically omitted community impact considerations while subtly referencing recent leadership distractions as justification for conservative approach focused on guaranteed returns rather than social innovation. When Alexandra introduced Richard as subject matter expert on veteran housing needs, Chen's expression betrayed momentary surprise before recovering professional composure. He clearly hadn't anticipated direct counter-testimony from Richard, perhaps assuming Alexandra would maintain separation between personal and professional connections. Richard approached the presentation with military precision, focusing on data rather than emotion despite personal investment and outcome. His slides demonstrated statistically significant correlation between stable housing and successful veteran employment, directly connecting proposed Horizon initiative to measurable community outcomes and potential corporate partnerships with veteran-friendly employers. The retention rate for veterans in transitional housing programs exceeds 87% when combined with employment support services. Richard maintained steady eye contact with board members, deliberately avoiding focus on either Alexandra or Chen. The proposed Horizon model would integrate both elements, potentially establishing industry benchmark for comprehensive transition support. Patricia Wilson leaned forward, engagement evident despite her typically inscrutable expression. What distinguishes this proposal from existing VA programs? Mr. Grant, the direct question, cutting to substantive evaluation rather than political positioning, suggested Patricia's interests transcended boardroom power dynamics. Richard recognized opportunity to address legitimate concern rather than merely countering Chen's narrative. VA programs provide essential foundation, but face bureaucratic constraints and funding limitations. Richard shifted to slides showing comparative analysis of application processes and wait times. Horizon's private sector flexibility could address critical gaps during transition period when veterans are most vulnerable to housing instability. Additionally, integrating veteran housing within mixed income development rather than isolated facilities promotes community integration and reduces stigma associated with assistance programs. The presentation continued with specific implementation recommendations, cost projections, and potential corporate partnership opportunities that would offset initial investment while enhancing Horizon's community standing. Throughout, Richard maintained professional focus on project merits rather than personal stake and outcome, though underlying awareness remained that Chen's luxury proposal threatened not just Alexandra's professional vision, but potentially her leadership position itself. When board questions concluded, Patricia called for closed-door deliberation without presenters present. Richard and Alexandra waited in her office, maintaining professional distance despite shared anxiety about outcome. The decision would impact not just corporate direction, but potentially their family stability. Significant leadership change could disrupt carefully constructed balance they'd established between personal and professional boundaries. Alexandra paced beside floor-to-ceiling windows. Boston skyline stretching beyond glass barrier that seemed suddenly fragile protection against external pressures. I should have anticipated Chen's move. He's been positioning developer connections for months, cultivating relationships with board members who prioritize short-term returns. Richard watched her movement, recognizing tactical assessment similar to military debriefs after challenging operations. Your mixed income proposal delivers stronger long-term benefits for both community and company. The data supports that conclusion, regardless of Chen's political maneuvering. Data doesn't always win against self-interest. Alexandra's bitter observation reflected hard-earned corporate wisdom rather than momentary pessimism. Some board members hold significant real estate investments that would benefit from luxury-only approach. Chen knows exactly which pressure points to target. The assessment, strategic rather than emotional, demonstrated Alexandra's sophisticated understanding of power dynamics beyond formal corporate structure. Richard recognized parallels to military operations, where official objectives sometimes masked underlying political considerations that determined actual resource allocation and mission parameters. Before he could respond, Patricia entered without preamble, her expression revealing nothing of board deliberations. The board has reached decision. They've approved modified version of mixed income proposal contingent on securing additional corporate partnerships for veteran component within 90 days. Richard, they've requested you lead partnership development team, reporting progress directly to board rather than through standard management structure. The unexpected outcome, neither complete victory nor defeat, represented classic corporate compromise that simultaneously advanced Alexandra's vision while establishing direct board oversight that bypassed her authority. The assignment of Richard to leadership role potentially strengthened veteran housing component while creating reporting relationship that circumvented normal chain of command, subtle reminder of board's power to reconfigure organizational structure. Alexandra processed implications quickly, professional mask revealing nothing of her reaction to this partial undermining of her authority. Thank you, Patricia. We'll begin partnership outreach immediately. Please convey my appreciation to the board for their continued support of our community investment initiatives. The carefully worded response, acknowledging decision without revealing frustration at modified reporting structure, demonstrated political acumen that had secured Alexandra's position despite repeated challenges. Patricia nodded acknowledgement before departing, leaving them to absorb implications privately. Once alone, Alexandra's composed expression gave way to complex mix of relief and frustration. It could have been worse. They approved the mixed income concept but created separate power structure for the veteran component. Classic divide and conquer strategy. Richard recognized potential complication for their carefully maintained boundary between professional and personal relationship. Me reporting directly to board creates awkward dynamic. Alexandra's laugh held minimal humor. That's rather the point. They're testing both of us. Your loyalty to the project versus loyalty to me. My ability to maintain professional separation despite our personal connection. Chen couldn't block the proposal entirely, so he's created structure designed to generate conflict between us instead. The assessment, cutting through corporate positioning to identify underlying strategy, revealed Alexandra's sophisticated understanding of boardroom tactics beyond formal business considerations. Richard found himself increasingly impressed by her ability to navigate complex power dynamics while maintaining focus on substantive objectives rather than personal advancement. How do we counter that strategy? Richard's question, collaborative rather than deferential, reflected growing partnership that transcended initial power imbalance in their relationship. Alexandra considered briefly before responding with unexpected simplicity. We don't counter, we demonstrate. 90 days of exemplary execution focused entirely on project success rather than political positioning. The veteran partnerships succeed because they deserve to succeed, benefiting actual people rather than corporate scorecards. The best response to manipulation is delivering results that speak for themselves. The straightforward approach, prioritizing mission success over political maneuvering, resonated with Richard's military mindset while revealing core values beneath Alexandra's corporate exterior. Despite different professional backgrounds and experiences, they shared fundamental commitment to substance over appearance, impact over perception. Then we better get started. 90 days isn't much time to secure corporate partnerships at the level they're expecting. Richard's practical focus, addressing tactical challenge rather than dwelling on strategic manipulation, matched Alexandra's pivot from analysis to action. I have several contacts from military networks who've transitioned to corporate positions. They might provide initial introductions to veteran-friendly employers. Alexandra moved to her desk, corporate efficiency replacing momentary vulnerability. I'll arrange meeting with marketing team to develop partnership proposal materials. We'll need compelling presentation package that emphasizes mutual benefits rather than charitable contribution. Their seamless shift to collaborative planning, each contributing distinct expertise towards shared objective, demonstrated evolving partnership beyond circumstantial connection or co-parenting arrangement. Richard recognized emerging pattern in their interactions, initial challenge, honest assessment of obstacles, and practical collaboration towards solution without excessive emotional processing or blame assignment. The efficiency suited both their personalities while addressing immediate needs, yet Richard sensed underlying current of unspoken concern beneath Alexandra's focused exterior. Beyond professional implications, the board's decision had subtly threatened carefully constructed balance they'd established between corporate and personal boundaries. By creating direct reporting relationship between Richard and board, Patricia had introduced potential complication to their developing co-parenting partnership. Alexandra evidently recognized similar implication, pausing amid tactical planning to address elephant in room. This doesn't change anything between us where the girls are concerned. We keep professional challenges separate from family priorities. Grace and Sophie come first regardless of corporate politics. The explicit boundary, family before corporate, reassured Richard that their core partnership remained secure despite professional complications. They had built something valuable over past month, foundation of trust and mutual respect that transcended initial awkward circumstances. Whatever corporate challenges emerged, their commitment to daughter's well-being provided stable foundation that board manipulations couldn't undermine. Always. Richard's simple affirmation conveyed deeper commitment than elaborate promises might have achieved. The girls come first. Everything else is just details we'll figure out along the way. Alexander's expression softened momentarily before professional mask returned the brief vulnerability, revealing depth beneath corporate exterior. Let's get through board presentation then. Focus on what matters most. Sophie has that dinosaur presentation at daycare tomorrow morning. I told Grace we'd both attend if possible. The reminder, returning focus to immediate family priority amid corporate chaos, reinforced their shared commitment beyond professional complications. Richard nodded, grateful for realignment toward core values rather than dwelling on board politics or power dynamics. Wouldn't miss it. Sophie's been practicing her pterodactyl facts all week. Grace has been helping her rehearse. The image, sisters supporting each other despite different interests and abilities, underscored unlikely family they'd created from circumstances none had chosen. Whatever corporate complications emerged from board decision foundation they'd built through consistent commitment to children's well-being provided stability that transcended professional uncertainties. 3 days later, the Horizon Foundation headquarters hosted celebration marking launch of Veteran Partnership Initiative. The event represented strategic opportunity to generate public support while establishing momentum for partnership development within 90-day window. Corporate representatives mingled with veteran service organizations, media capturing interactions that reinforced Horizon's community commitment narrative, while subtly countering lingering speculation about Alexander and Richard's personal connection. Alexandra delivered opening remarks from Ray's platform corporate polish evident in her precisely tailored suit and confident delivery. Richard stood among audience rather than joining her on stage, deliberate choice maintaining professional separation despite their personal connection. Grace and Sophie watched from front row dressed in complementary outfits that visually connected them as sisters despite different mothers and upbringings. Our commitment to veteran housing represents Horizon's core belief that successful communities include diverse residents with varied experiences and contributions. Alexandra's practiced corporate voice revealed none of the political battles that had preceded this moment. We recognize particular challenges facing military families during transition to civilian life, and we're committed to creating pathways that honor their service through practical support. She introduced Richard with carefully calibrated language that emphasized professional qualifications rather than personal connection. Richard Grant brings firsthand understanding of military transition challenges, having served 6 years in Air Force before establishing civilian career. His leadership of our partnership initiative will ensure programs address actual needs rather than merely checking corporate responsibility boxes. Richard joined her on stage at this cue, maintaining professional demeanor despite discomfort with public scrutiny that continued following their private lives. His remarks focused on programmatic details and partnership opportunities, deliberately steering narrative towards substantive impact rather than personal story. What veterans need isn't charity but opportunity, chance to apply skills developed through service toward meaningful civilian contribution. Richard's voice carried authority born from authentic experience rather than corporate positioning. Horizon's initiative creates that bridge through integrated approach to housing, employment, and community connection. The presentation continued with technical details and partnership announcements, several corporate representatives joining them on stage to formalize initial commitments. Throughout, Richard maintained focus on program substance rather than personal narrative, establishing professional credibility independent from circumstances that had brought him to Horizon. As formal presentation concluded and networking reception began, Richard found Grace tugging his sleeve with urgent expression that transcended social niceties. Sophie needs the bathroom but doesn't want to go alone. Can I take her? The simple request, sisterly responsibility, trumping formal corporate event, grounded Richard amid artificial networking environment. He squeezed Grace's shoulder appreciatively. Thank you for looking out for her. Stay together and come right back. Okay, Grace nodded solemnly, taking Sophie's hand with protective older sister authority that had developed remarkably quickly despite their brief acquaintance. The younger girl followed trustingly, their contrasting heights and coloring underscoring genetic differences that social bonding had transcended. They make quite the team. Alexandra appeared beside Richard, professional smile softening as she watched daughters navigate through crowd. Grace has been teaching Sophie to read this week. Completely unprompted, just decided her sister needed head start before kindergarten. The observation, shared parental pride transcending biological connection, epitomized evolution in their relationship. From strangers connected by shocking revelation to reluctant co-parents to genuine partners, they had navigated unfamiliar territory with increasing synchronicity, despite occasional missteps and external complications. Richard watched the girls disappear round corner, struck by unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 weeks ago, I didn't know Grace existed. Now I can't imagine life without either of them together. The honest reflection, vulnerability unusual for Richard's typically reserved demeanor, acknowledged transformation beyond practical arrangements or legal obligations. Despite initial shock and anger at lost years, he had found unexpected gift in relationship with daughter he hadn't known existed, an extension of family through her connection with Sophie. Alexandra's response came after thoughtful pause, her voice softening from corporate precision to genuine emotion. Family rarely looks like what we expect. Sometimes it's pieced together from broken parts that fit perfectly once you stop forcing traditional patterns. The insight, philosophical rather than practical, revealed depth beneath Alexandra's strategic exterior. Behind corporate efficiency and calculated decisions lay capacity for profound understanding that transcended business metrics or social conventions. Before Richard could respond, Patricia Wilson approached with determined expression that suggested purpose beyond social pleasantry. The veteran partnerships have generated positive media coverage. Board members are cautiously optimistic about 90-day objectives. You two have managed situation remarkably well, considering circumstances. The assessment, delivered with characteristic directness, acknowledged their navigation of complex personal and professional boundaries while subtly recognizing board's role in creating those complications. Patricia's expression suggested grudging respect beyond initial strategic manipulation that had placed Richard at horizon. Alexandra maintained professional composure despite personal victory implicit in Patricia's assessment. The veteran initiative deserves support regardless of personal circumstances. Richard's leadership has brought authenticity that corporate programs often lack. The praise, professional rather than personal, maintained appropriate boundaries while acknowledging Richard's contributions beyond circumstances of his hiring. Patricia nodded thoughtfully before delivering unexpected information that transcended immediate project considerations. Thomas asked about you both this morning. He'd like to meet Grace's father when you have time. The reference to Alexandra's father, former CEO now partially recovered from stroke that had elevated Alexandra to leadership, carried significance beyond casual social invitation. Thomas Holt remained powerful figure within Horizon despite reduced active involvement, his approval potentially influencing board dynamics beyond official structures. Alexandra's momentary surprise quickly transformed to composed acknowledgement. I'll arrange visit this weekend if Richard is comfortable with that. The consideration, checking Richard's preference rather than assuming acceptance, demonstrated evolving partnership despite power imbalance inherent in their different positions and backgrounds. Richard nodded agreement, recognizing significance beyond social pleasantry while appreciating Alexandra's deference to his comfort level. I'd be honored to meet your father. The formal response, appropriate to occasion, masked complex emotions about meeting man whose business empire had shaped circumstances, bringing him to Grace while simultaneously creating professional opportunity beyond service industry limitations. Patricia seemed satisfied with this arrangement, departing as abruptly as she'd arrived. Richard and Alexandra exchanged glance conveying shared recognition of potential implications beyond immediate interaction. Thomas Holt's interests suggested shifting dynamics within corporate power structure, possible realignment that might stabilize their unusual situation against future challenges from Chen or other opponents. The girls returned before they could discuss further, Sophie excitedly reporting bathroom mirror that showed her dinosaur dress from multiple angles. The childish enthusiasm, grounding corporate complexities in family reality, reminded both adults of priorities transcending professional considerations. As reception continued around them, Richard observed moment of perfect alignment amid unlikely circumstances. Grace helping Sophie balance plate of cookies, Alexandra seamlessly redirecting corporate conversation to accommodate children's presence himself, finding unexpected belonging within an environment that should have felt foreign to former military technician turned barista. The family they'd pieced together from circumstances none had chosen somehow functioned with surprising harmony, despite external pressures and internal adjustments. Whatever challenges awaited, corporate politics, public scrutiny, or natural complications of blended family dynamics, foundation they'd built through consistent commitment and mutual respect provided stability beyond conventional structures or expected patterns. Family rarely arrives in packages we anticipate or forms we plan. Sometimes it emerges from broken pieces that create something stronger than original design, connection forged through challenge rather than convenience. For Richard Grant, Alexandra Holt, Grace and Sophie, that unexpected journey had only just begun.